कृपा अंजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु देखत नाही। कृपा अंजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु देखत नाही। कृपा बाहर रामा, अंदर रामा, बाहर रामा, जहाँ देखो सो राम ही रामा, जहाँ देखो सो राम ही रामा, जहाँ देखो सो राम ही रामा। कृपा अंजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु देखत नाही। कृपा जागत राम सोवत रामा, जागत राम सोवत रामा, सपनों में देखो राजाधिराम, सपनों में देखो राजाधिराम, सपनों में देखो राजाधिराम। कृपा अंजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु देखत नाही। कृपा एका जनार्दनी भावहीनी का, एका जनार्दनी भावहीनी का, जो देखो सो राम सरी 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 का। कृपा अंजन पायो मेरे भाई, राम बिना कछु देखत नाही। कृपा
सहना भवतु, सहनौ भुनक्तु, सह वीर्यं करवावहै, तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति Shanti Shanti. Om Namo Bhagavate Vaivasvataya Mrityave Brahma Vidyacharya Nachiketase cha. So in the last class, we had seen the chariot metaphor. So there is a great journey that every jīvātmā has to take. In this travel, the destination is Paramātmā, one's own true self, the Supreme Self. In this journey, it is not a spatial distance to be covered in miles or kilometers, no. It is not a journey outwards into the outer space, no. It is a journey from ignorance to knowledge. It is a journey from darkness to light. It is an inward journey, a journey where we try to know our own true self. It's a journey towards real happiness, real bliss. So it is a journey from misery to bliss. So this journey is compared with a chariot, the journey in the chariot. So what are the components there, entities there? Atmanam rathinam vidhi, the traveler, the jīvātmā is compared with the owner of the chariot, the traveler in the chariot. Atmanam rathinam vidhi, shariram rathamevatu. And this physical body where we find ourselves, this physical body is compared with the chariot. Buddhim tu sarathim vidhi. This buddhi, the intellect, is the sarathi, the charioteer, the driver of the chariot. Manaha pragrahamevacha. Know this mind to be the reins to control the horses. Indriyani hayan ahuhu. Know our sense organs, the 5 organs of action and the 5 organs of knowledge. Know these 10 organs to be the horses of this chariot. Vishayans teshu gocharan. For every sense organ, there has to be a sense object, that is the field for that sense organ. So that field of the sense organ, which is a sense object, Vishaya, is compared with the path. So just like a horse needs a path to run, so too the organ needs a field to function. So therefore the path for the chariot is compared with the sense objects. So this is the comparison. So yesterday we were in detail seeing all this. Now we have to understand how this journey happens. The chariot journey we understand, but actually what is the journey of this jīvātmā? So here, this process we have to understand. What is the process? The process is like this. So we have some knowledge with us. With this knowledge we desire. So first step, know. The second step, desire. So desire will be based on our present knowledge. And once we desire, remember, desire is always for happiness. What are we actually desiring? We are desiring happiness. So we desire something of the world to become happy. So we desire, thinking that something will give happiness, because that is the knowledge which we have. So based on this knowledge, we desire, and once the desire comes, we perform action to fulfill the desire. This is the third stage. So know, desire, the third stage is act. Act means perform action to fulfill that desire. So you have done a karma, you have done an action. Now what happens? Once action is performed, the karma phala will come. The results of those actions will come. So what do? We experience those results. We do the bhoga. We experience them. So what are the possible results of the action? There are only two. Either this result will give us joy, or the result will give us sorrow. Sukha or dukkha, joy or sorrow is the result. So know, desire, act, experience joy or sorrow. Now, what is the next step? If the experience is joy, then we understand that the knowledge is right. Right knowledge gives us joy, wrong knowledge gives us sorrow. So if it is joy, then we introspect. After experiencing joy, we introspect and we find that because of this knowledge I was happy. So therefore the knowledge is right. So then we confirm that knowledge. But if the experience is sorrow, then again we introspect and we say, no, this knowledge is not right. That is why the end result of this knowledge is sorrowful. So again we introspect and then we correct our knowledge. We go back and correct the knowledge. With this corrected knowledge, again we desire. So corrected knowledge, again desire, again act, again experience the result. The result is either joy or sorrow. If it is joy, confirm the knowledge. If it is sorrow, then correct the knowledge, again come back, correct the knowledge, again desire. So now you will find that there is a cycle there. So how long will this cycle continue? The cycle will continue till we have the right perfect knowledge. And what is that perfect knowledge? The perfect knowledge is when jīvātmā knows himself to be Paramātmā. Aham Brahmasmi is the perfect knowledge. So with this perfect knowledge, what happens? What happens to the desire? Once I come to know that I am Satchidananda Atma, bliss is my nature, I don't have to desire anything of the world to gain that bliss. So what happens to desire? I become desireless, because I come to know that this happiness, this bliss is my own nature. I don't have to seek it from the outer world. So then what happens to my worldly desires? Worldly desires end. Then what happens to external actions? Actions also end. So this cycle comes to an end. So now I attain contentment, now I attain absolute bliss, now I attain absolute knowledge. Jīvātmā has known himself to be Paramātmā. So perfect knowledge, perfect bliss, and the cycle comes to an end. Punarapi jananam, punarapi maranam, this repeated birth, death comes to an end. This cycle is broken. This is called as moksha, this is called as salvation, enlightenment, whatever name we give. They are all one and the same. Different names are given: moksha, mukti, nirvana, salvation, enlightenment, liberation. They are all synonymous terms. So it is that state of perfect knowledge, it is a state of perfect bliss. So this is the journey which is being described here. So this is a journey from ignorance to knowledge. It is a journey from misery to bliss. Right. So this we have to understand when we think, when we reflect upon this metaphor of this chariot. Now what is said here, Atmendriya mano yuktam bhokta iti ahuhu manishinaha. Manishinaha, the wise people, they say, what do they say? They say that this traveler, who is this traveler? Earlier it is said Atmanam Ratinam Vidhi, the owner of this chariot, the master of this chariot, the one who is traveling. So they say he is the bhokta, the enjoyer. How does he enjoy? Yuktam. So united with, associated with, identified with. Yuktam means all this meaning. So identified with, associated with Atma, Indriya, Mana. Atma here means body. Indriya means senses. Mana means mind. So associated with the body and the senses and the mind, this traveler is the bhokta. So another term is given here. So who is this bhokta? He is none other than jīvātmā. He is none other than the traveler. So jīvātmā is traveling towards Paramātmā. Now here we also must understand one thing. In the first verse, what is the comparison given? Paramātmā is compared with light, jīvātmā is compared with shadow. Please remember this. Chhaya, atapa. So this was the comparison given. So actually what does it mean? What it means is there is nothing called jīvātmā, there is only Paramātmā. So what is the relationship between jīvātmā and Paramātmā? One is the light, the other is the shade. Now here we clearly understand the relationship. What is the relationship? Paramātmā identified with body, mind, intellect and the senses is called jīvātmā. See, because there is only one, there is only Paramātmā. Then where did this jīvātmā come from? So Paramātmā identified with BMI is called jīvātmā. Put in another words, Paramātmā in his ignorance is jīvātmā. Put in another words, Paramātmā having this wrong notion that I am this body, mind, intellect is jīvātmā. So who is this bhokta actually? This bhokta is actually speaking Paramātmā alone. There are no two entities, there is only one entity. That one entity himself has become the other entity through ignorance. So Paramātmā plus ignorance equal to jīvātmā. Paramātmā plus BMI equal to jīvātmā. All these equations are valid. Atmendriya mano yuktam bhokta. So where do they reside? In the first verse it is said they reside in the core of the heart. They reside in the same place, jīvātmā and Paramātmā. So two entities present in the same place. This jīvātmā is none other than Paramātmā, but with ignorance. So this ignorance has to go and then jīvātmā will become one with Paramātmā. Actually they are one only. It is only because of ignorance that jīvātmā is not knowing his oneness with Paramātmā. This existence of jīvātmā and Paramātmā together we can clearly understand with the example of that film theatre. So in the film theatre we are watching the film. So in us there are two entities. The one entity is just watching the film, is just witnessing the film. It knows that the whole thing is a bluff. It is nothing but a play of light and sound. It knows. This is one entity in us just witnessing the movie. Another entity in us becomes identified with the characters in the movie and then it goes through joys and sorrows. So we cry and weep, we become worried and anxious in the theatre. So if we find ourselves, there are two entities in us. One is going through the ups and downs of the movie. This is one part of our mind. The other part of the mind is firmly rooted in the truth that I am in the film theatre, I have nothing to do with the characters, and this film is all an illusory play on the white screen. Now see, both the knowledge we have. So this absolute knowledge also we have, that we are in the theatre and this movie has nothing to do with me. And there is a relative identification also happening, where I identify with the characters and that I go through the joys and sorrows of the movie. You see, both of them are there. There is a witness also and there is an identifying entity also. So the witness is the Paramātmā and the identifying entity is the jīvātmā. So in the same way, here also, so Paramātmā is actually a witness, but that very same Paramātmā, we can say one part identifies with the world and becomes the jīvātmā. So what is this travel? This travel is nothing but traveling towards knowledge. And the purpose of this knowledge is to remove all wrong notions about ourselves, to know that we are not the body, mind, intellect, we are the pure consciousness, the witnessing consciousness. Here our journey ends. So this journey has to be thoroughly understood. Right, now moving to the next two verses. Now here comes the importance of the intellect. So yesterday also, the last class also we had discussed the most important role is the role of the intellect. If the chariot reaches the destination safely and swiftly, the intellect has to be, the charioteer, the intellect has to be congratulated. And if the chariot doesn't reach the destination, it is the charioteer which has to be blamed. So the role of this charioteer, the intellect, is highlighted in the next two verses. Let us chant verse number 5 and 6, page number 156. Yastva Vijñānavān bhavati ayuktena manasa sada tasyendriyāṇyavashyāni dushta iva sārathe. Yastva Vijñānavān bhavati ayuktena manasa sada tasyendriyāṇyavashyāni dushta iva sārathe. Page number 158, verse number 6. Yastu Vijñānavān bhavati yuktena manasa sada tasyendriyāṇi vashyāni sadāshvāha iva sārathe. Yastu Vijñānavān bhavati yuktena manasa sada tasyendriyāṇi vashyāni sadāshvāha iva sārathe. Yes. So, what is said here? Yastu avijñānavān bhavati, the one who is avijñānavān, without vijñānam, without knowledge. So that person, that jīvātmā, who has an intellect which is ignorant, which has no knowledge, then what will happen? Ayuktena manasa, such a person will have only ayukta manas. Ayukta means non-integrated, disintegrated. A mind which doesn't cooperate with the intellect is called ayukta. Yukta means to unite, to come together. So the mind which does not cooperate with the intellect is called ayukta manas. non-united mind. Sada, always. Tasya indriyani avashyani, for such a person who does not have right knowledge, in whom the intellect is not fully educated, and who will experience that the mind is not cooperating with him. For such a person, what will happen? Indriyani avashyani. For such a person, he will find that his senses, the sense organs, are avashyani, not under one's own control. He will never be able to control his senses, just like dushta ashvāhā, the wild untamed horses, sārathehe, of the charioteer. So just like a charioteer will not be able to control, discipline the wild untamed horses. What kind of charioteer? An inefficient charioteer. A charioteer who does not know how to handle the chariot, how to ride the chariot. So such a charioteer will find it very difficult to control the horses. The horses will become wild. The charioteer will not be able to control those horses. In the same way, a person who does not have the right knowledge, Vijñānavān, such a person will definitely have a non-cooperating mind, and with that non-cooperating mind, such a person will find it impossible to control his senses. On the other hand, yastu Vijñānavān bhavati. Now see, now these two verses, the verses are very similar, but only the thing is the terms are opposites. Verse number 5, it is Avijñānavān. Verse number 6, it is Vijñānavān. Verse number 5, Ayuktena. Verse number 6, Yuktena. Terms are just the opposite. Verse number 5, Indriyani avashyani. Verse number 6, Indriyani vashyani. Dushtaśva, sadāshvāha. Bas. Just the opposite. In one case, intellect is ignorant, in the other case, intellect is knowledgeable. With the ignorant intellect, mind is non-united, non-cooperating. With the knowledgeable intellect, mind is united, cooperating. With the ignorant intellect, senses are indisciplined, out of control. With the knowledgeable intellect, senses are disciplined, in control. So both the verses, they are similar. They are the two different states. What happens when the intellect is ignorant versus what happens when the intellect is knowledgeable. So these two comparisons are given here. Right. So the essence of these two verses is the most important role is the role of the intellect. This is the point. Because if the intellect is ignorant, sada, now see the term sada there. Sada means always. If the intellect is ignorant, then always mind will be non-cooperating and the sense organs will be indisciplined, out of control. Always sada. So they all go together. Ignorant intellect, non-cooperating mind, indisciplined senses. They will always go together. In the same way, knowledgeable intellect, cooperating mind and disciplined senses, they always go together. So it is impossible that you have a knowledgeable intellect and your senses are not in control, your mind doesn't obey that. It's impossible. This is the meaning of that sada term. So what does it mean? What it means is knowledge is absolutely unavoidable. Which knowledge? Spiritual knowledge. Spiritual knowledge is the most important thing if you have to have control over your life, if you have to make your life a success, if you want liberation in life, if you want to move Godward, if you want to attain Paramātmā, there is no choice but to make your intellect efficient. And intellect can become efficient only through spiritual knowledge. You see this. The blame goes not for anybody else in the chariot. The blame is not on the mind or the senses or the owner of the chariot or the chariot. No. Exactly like the chariot example. The blame is not on the horses or the reins or the chariot owner. No. The blame is upon the charioteer. So, spiritual knowledge and its importance is highlighted here. Knowledge is the most important thing. Only a knowledgeable intellect can take us safely across this samsāra sagara. So that is why in Bhagavad Gita also it is said, Nahi jnānena sadrisham pavitramiha vidyate. There is no greater purifier than jnānam, spiritual knowledge. So the same thing is mentioned here. The glory of knowledge is mentioned here. So just like the charioteer finds it difficult or impossible to control the horses and thus to control the chariot, if he doesn't have the right knowledge, in the same way we will never be able to attain success in life without spiritual knowledge. I have heard a very funny and interesting story about riding a horse. So there was this man who went to purchase a horse. So the horse seller, he showed him a horse. He said, "Sir, this horse is a unique horse. You have to just give the right command and this horse will just obey. There are only two commands which you need to know. Just you have to remember this command and then this horse will just obey you." So what is the command? He said, if you want the horse to run, so first you sit on this horse. Now if you want the horse to run, you have to just say, "I am saved, I am saved." Then the horse will start running. Now if you want the horse to stop, then you have to say, "Save me, save me." This is the instruction. So when you say, "Save me," the horse will stop. And when you say, "I am saved," the horse will run. That's all. It's such a simple instruction. Sir, you don't have to know anything about this horse riding. You have to just remember these two instructions, that's all. And then this particular horse will take you to your destination. You don't have to learn anything. Just these two instructions are enough. The person was very happy. He immediately gave the money and got the horse. Sat on the horse. So what is the instruction for the horse to run? The instruction is, "I am saved." And he loudly said to this horse, "I am saved." And the horse started running. Now the horse started picking up speed. It was running in full josh, full power. And what happened? This horse was galloping towards the very edge of a mountain. Now this person wanted to stop this horse. He forgot this instruction, the instruction to stop the horse. Now the horse is running and it is running towards the edge of a mountain. He forgot that instruction and in that panic, he shouted, "Save me, save me." And the moment he said, "Save me," the horse stopped. The horse stopped just at the edge of this mountain. One more step and both of them will tumble down. And when the horse stopped, with a great sigh of relief, he said, "Thank God I am saved." Now you can imagine what happened next. Very a fictitious, funny story. But the point is this: if we don't know how to control the horse, we will be in trouble. So the charioteer who does not know how to control the horses, he puts the chariot and the honor of the chariot in trouble. In the same way, the intellect which is ignorant will put us in trouble. Now we have to understand the functioning of this intellect and the mind and the senses. So what is said here? Intellect must be Vijñānavān. Now Vijñānavān means what? So Vijñānavān or Avijñānavān? Van means the possessor of. So Balavan means the possessor of Bala, strength. So a strong person is called Balavan, the possessor of strength. The person with wealth is called Dhanavan, the person with wealth, the possessor of wealth, Dhanavan. A person with knowledge is called Jnānavān, the possessor of knowledge. In the same way, Avijñānavān means what? The possessor of absence of knowledge, means ignorance. So the ignorant one. Now who is ignorant one here? So Avijñānavān can go for the intellect also and the possessor of that intellect also. Who is the possessor of the intellect? The jīvātmā. So Vijñānavān means jīvātmā or Avijñānavān means the intellect. Yastu Avijñānavān bhavati. So since the intellect is possessed by the jīvātmā, so jīvātmā also can be called Vijñānavān. But because this ignorance is possessed by the intellect, so the intellect also can be called Avijñānavān, right? So the point is this: Yastu Avijñānavān bhavati, the one who has such an intellect which is ignorant, where there is no knowledge, what will happen? Ayuktena manasa sada. That mind will be ayukta. Yukta means integrated, yukta means united. So an intellect without the right knowledge will have no cooperation from the mind. So whatever the intellect says, the mind will not listen. This is the meaning non-cooperation. This is the meaning non-united. Ayuktena. Then what will the mind do? The mind will not listen to the intellect. The mind will listen to the senses. And what is the nature of the senses? Avashyani. Absolutely out of control. So the intellect will not be able to control the senses. This is the meaning. Now we have to understand why this is happening. So let us start from the basics. What does the mind want? Mind wants only one thing: happiness. Mind wants happiness. So whoever is able to give this mind happiness, it will support that entity. Now, what is the happiness? What are the possibilities of happiness available in this world? So one is called Vishyananda, the pleasure born out of sense indulgence. The other is called Atmananda, the bliss of the self. So we all know our self is Satchit Ananda. So there is a bliss of the self. So that is called as Atmananda. the bliss emanating from the self, Atma. Atmananda comes from the educated intellect. Vishyananda comes from the indulgent senses. Right? Yes. Mind wants happiness. So whoever is able to give happiness to the mind will support that. If the senses are giving Vishyananda and if the intellect is not giving Atmananda, the mind will support the senses. This is what happens in majority of our case. The intellect is ignorant. It doesn't know what that Atmananda is because it is not exposed to spiritual knowledge. It has not done any sadhana. Intellect is ignorant. So naturally, what is the only option available for the mind? The only option available for the mind is to experience Vishyananda. And Vishyananda is all the time available. The moment senses come in contact with the sense objects, Vishyananda is born. Samsparshaja bhogaha, it is said. The moment sense organs come in touch with the sense objects, this bhoga, this pleasure is born, this happiness is born. The senses are designed to indulge in sense pleasures in the sense objects, and the moment it indulges, there is pleasure born, there is happiness, and mind gets this happiness. So naturally, therefore, mind is inclined towards senses, it is inclined towards sensuous indulgence. Now, what is the nature of this Vishyananda? The nature of this Vishyananda is it is very cheaply available. It is very effortless, readily available. This is the nature of Vishyananda. The moment I eat ice cream, happiness has come. The moment I allow the senses to indulge, there is happiness. It is very easily available, cheaply available. But what is the problem with Vishyananda? The problem is agre amrutopamam pariname visham. While indulging, it is wonderful, but after indulgence, there is always some or the other kind of pain. So therefore, lot of defects are there. That's why Bhagavan says, Yehi samsparshaja bhoga dukkha yona, is the womb of sorrow, Bhagavad Gita says. In the beginning there is pleasure, no doubt, but after that there is only suffering and pain. So what is the nature of Vishyananda? Number one, it is finite. Number two, it is addictive. Number three, it is destructive. It destroys the vitalities of the body and the senses. It makes us weak. It takes away the tejas, the strength of the body. Every time we indulge, the strength is gone, the vitalities are gone. So it is destructive. It is also addictive. So when we indulge, there is pleasure, and for some time there is some relief. But next time again that craving is there in the mind to indulge more. So every time we indulge, the craving goes on increasing. So that's why in Bhagavad Gita the comparison is with fire. Dushpurena analena cha. Just like that fire. Insatiable like fire. How much ever fuel you put into fire, the fire will keep on asking more, demanding more. In the same way, how much ever we indulge in these pleasures, there never comes a time when we feel that yes, enough. There is no satiation. This is the nature of these pleasures. So it is addictive, it is destructive, and also it is finite. It is limited. Why is it finite? Remember, Vishyananda is only a reflected Ananda. Reflected from what? Reflected from Atmananda. So real bliss is emanating from Atma, the self. The source of real bliss is Atma. Vishyananda is only a reflected bliss, reflected in the mind intellect instrument. Now tell me, which is more intense, the original or the reflection? Original sun is there, reflected sun is there. Which is more intense, which has more light and heat? So we know that reflection is in no comparison with the original. The original sun is lakhs and lakhs of times bigger than the sun. It is full of heat and light. It is all powerful. The whole earth is illumined by it, heated by it, nourished by it. What about this reflected sun? This reflected sun is in no comparison with the original sun. In the same way, Vishyananda is only a reflection of Atmananda. So therefore, Vishyananda is definitely finite and it is in no comparison compared to Atmananda. So therefore, we can say Vishyananda is not only finite, the problem is it is addictive and destructive. It is full of defects. This pleasure may be a cheap pleasure, an effortless pleasure, but it is full of defects. It is effortless because to indulge in senses, no tapas is necessary. It is like just rolling the stone down the hill. You don't have to put forth any effort in rolling the stone down the hill. No effort is needed. It is effortless. So that is the problem with Vishyananda. So if the mind is not exposed to Atmananda, mind will be tempted to fall for Vishyananda. And this is what happens with majority of us. We are not exposed to Atmananda, so the mind is aware only of Vishyananda. And the mind thinks this is the real source of Ananda. But when we gain the spiritual knowledge and when we train the intellect in this knowledge, so such an intellect which is purified, which is trained in the intelligent ways of living, the righteous ways of living, which is trained in effacing one's own ego, which is trained in all noble virtues of life, such a strong intellect, enlightened intellect. Now this is called as Vijñānavān. Keep this in mind. A strong intellect, efficient intellect, enlightened intellect, knowledgeable intellect, educated intellect, such a powerful intellect will convince the mind that if you want real happiness, it is not in Vishaya, it is in Atma. So then what does that intellect do? Yato yato nischarati manaschanchalam astiram tatastato niyamye tat atmanyeva vasham nayet, Bhagavad Gita says. So whenever that mind goes into the outer field, chasing pleasures, hunting for pleasure, craving for pleasure, what does this powerful intellect do? It withdraws the mind from all those fields, atmanyeva vasham nayet, and it turns the attention of the mind towards the self. And that intellect is capable of doing it because it is very strong, convinced, full of clarity, full of conviction, full of strength. Such an intellect tells the mind, oh dear mind, don't go for that Vishyananda. It is a duplicate Ananda. It is a defective Ananda. It is an imperfect Ananda. It is a finite Ananda. Don't go there. Come, I will give you a better Ananda, the greater source, the original source. And having tasted it, you will never want to go back to that Vishyananda, back to the senses. So come here. So this way, the intellect forces the mind to withdraw. And the mind is ready to withdraw because if somebody is promising greater joy, greater happiness, the mind is ever ready to follow his advice. So the mind gets withdrawn and that mind is turned toward the self. And the intellect is able to fix the mind in the self because intellect is a well-trained intellect, a knowledgeable intellect. And when the mind abides in that self, it gains Atmananda. Now what is the nature of this Ananda? This Ananda is absolute Ananda, the most auspicious Ananda, pure Ananda, fulfilling Ananda. See, See the difference. It is so fulfilling. It is free from all kinds of defects. So when that mind experiences this Ananda in the self, such a mind becomes a happy slave of that powerful intellect. That is called as Yuktena Manasa. Such a mind, what happens to that mind? Yukta, it becomes united with the intellect. It becomes always one with the intellect. Why it is one with the intellect? Because that mind knows, here is this intellect who has given me the highest happiness. So I just have to do one thing, I have to just obey this intellect, and this intellect will give me the greatest joy. It will take me to the source of the highest joy. So because this intellect has given me the highest joy, so therefore my job is only one to obey this intellect. Because if I obey this intellect, I will be the happiest. So what is the problem in obeying? So that mind becomes yukta. Yukta means one. Yukta means cooperating. So that mind cooperates with the intellect. Meaning what? The mind and intellect becomes one. Mind intellect becoming one means what? Whatever the intellect says, the mind agrees to it. The intellect says this is right, and the mind says, okay, if that is right, I love doing it. This is the meaning. Mind is the seat of likes and dislikes. So whatever the intellect says, the mind loves doing it. So such a mind is called an integrated mind, integrated with the intellect. Then what happens to the senses then? Tasyendriyani vashyani. Such senses which has no cooperation of the mind, that senses become totally disciplined. Because senses cannot go to the sense object without the permission of the mind. And what is the condition of the mind? The mind is at the feet of the intellect. So naturally the senses also will be at the feet of the mind, meaning completely disciplined. Tasyendriyani vashyani. So if we have to control our mind, if we have to control our senses, what is the most important thing? The most important thing is a perfect intellect. How can the intellect be perfected? Only one way, through right knowledge. Very many times we make this big mistake. Without knowledge, we try to control the mind and the senses. For some time, with our willpower, we are able to control, but it will end up only in suppression. Suppression is not the solution, because anything suppressed will explode. It's like a pressure cooker, it will explode. So spiritual way is not suppression, spiritual way is sublimation. So what is sublimation? Exposing the mind to the higher joys so that the mind drops the lower pleasures of the world. So when the mind is exposed to the higher joys, naturally what mind wants is higher joy. Now the spiritual joy and the worldly joy, they cannot be attained together. If you have to choose one, you have to give up the other. So naturally the mind will weigh the pros and cons, and you will find that spiritual joy is a higher joy, more fulfilling joy, defectless joy, perfect joy, effortless joy. So naturally such a mind will prefer spiritual joy and not worldly joy. So then what happens? That mind drops the worldly pleasure and it clings on to the spiritual bliss. So this is called as sublimation, and this is the way we have to overcome all addictions in life. We have so many addictions in life. How to come over this addiction? The best way is sublimation. The sublimation is the spiritual path, is the spiritual way. It is not suppression, but it is sublimation. Now, this is one means to know how much we are progressing in the path of spirituality. This can be a measure. To what extent my mind is disciplined? To what extent my mind is in control? To what extent my senses are in my control? To what extent this mind and the senses, they cooperate in my noble endeavors? Greater the spiritual progress, greater is the cooperation which I receive from my mind and the senses. This can be a spiritual measure. This can be a test for measuring our spiritual progress. Now here one more thing we have to keep in mind. Here see, the most importance is given to the intellect and not to the chariot. Means what? It doesn't matter whether we are male or female. It doesn't matter. What matters is the knowledge of the intellect. What matters is spiritual knowledge. So let us keep away the misconceptions in the mind that only male people are supposed to follow spirituality, not the female. All such wrong notions are there in the society. Keep everything aside. Scriptures, they don't talk about the physical body. What they talk is the knowledge, the intellect, the discriminative ability. This is the most important, not the physical body. Now, another thing also can be discussed here. That is the different types of intellect that we see in the society. So the first is tamasic intellect. What is tamasic intellect? So the tamasic intellect sees joy before indulgence and it sees joy after indulgence. So this is the grossest, the most inferior intellect. So after indulging in pleasure, the intellect says, wow, it was wonderful. I look forward to such indulgence again. So if this is the way the intellect is guiding us, know for sure it is tamasic intellect. Such people, they become drunkards and drug addicts and chain smokers and all that. They ruin their life. For them, their senses becomes dushta ashvāhā, wicked horses. Not only that, they don't take you towards destination, they take you directly towards hell. They make your life hell. This is called as dushta ashvāhā. A tamasic intellect is the intellect which sees black as white and white as black. So Vishyananda, it says, is the ultimate Ananda, so let us indulge more and more. This is what a tamasic intellect does. Very dangerous. For them, the senses become wicked horses. They take them to Naraka only, to hell. And so many such instances we find in life. Addicted to anger, greed, lust, people destroy their life. So many examples can be given. How many people are rotting in the jails just because they could not control their anger, their lust, their greed. So what has happened? Their own sense organs have become dushta ashvāhā, wicked, cruel horses. Now the second type of intellect is called rajasic intellect. What is rajasic intellect? Before indulgence, that intellect says, it is a wonderful pleasure, it's wonderful. But after indulgence, there is only regret and guilt. So this is the second category. Generally, the beginners of spirituality have this problem. It's a mediocre intellect, the rajasic intellect. So beginning, the moment we are in front of the sense objects, we lose all our discriminative ability. We think this is the ultimate end of life, this is the greatest pleasure. Then we indulge, but after indulgence there is a great guilt, there is pain, there is sorrow. There is a feeling, ayyo, I shouldn't have indulged, what a mistake I have done. This is the nature of rajasic intellect. And what about the third one, the sattvic intellect, the best intellect, which is the case of the advanced seekers? As far as the sattvic intellect is concerned, the moment it sees the sense object, it sees the pain after indulgence and not the pleasure during indulgence. So this is called Vijñānavān. Such an intellect is Vijñānavān, highly knowledgeable. So the moment the sense object is there, what does he see? He sees the intense pain after indulgence compared to a mild joy during indulgence. So that intellect is very clear. The joy which that indulgence gives is very less compared to the losses and the miseries after indulgence. So therefore, even though the sense object is in front, such an intellect will not give the command to the mind and the senses to go and indulge. The mind remains disciplined even in the wake of sense objects, even in the presence of sense objects. Such an intellect is called Vijñānavān. So what happens to the senses then? Sadāshvāha, they are good horses. They are very well under the control of the mind, and the mind is very well under the control of the intellect. They don't misbehave, they don't disobey. They are ever at the feet of that wise intellect. So such a person will have no problem in life at all. So truly speaking, who is the one who is in heaven? The one who has the intellect, mind and senses totally under control. Such a person lives in heaven even though he is living in this world. He is the happiest man, he is the most contented man, he is the most fulfilled man, the most blessed man. And now, Yamarāja says, such a person who has total mastery over the mind and senses because of perfect knowledge, such a person is the one who is going to reach the destination, the ultimate truth. That is the content of the next verse. We will see it in the next class. Om Sarve Bhavantu Sukhinah Sarve Santu Niramayaha Sarve Bhadrani Pashyantu Ma Kaschid Dukkha Bhag Bhavet Asato Ma Sadgamaya Tamaso Ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om.